4 years ago, you left me because you wanted an heir. Now look carefully. You abandoned 4 of them.
Chapter 1. The Letter That Broke the Silence. Here is what you need to know before this chapter begins. Elena Voss had been living in Boston for 4 years and 2 months, which is long enough to stop flinching when you think you recognize a face in a crowd that you would rather not see again. Long enough to have developed the specific relationship with a city that comes from knowing which streetlights take too long and which school gate has a broken latch, and how the harbor sits in October, gray and flat and entirely itself. She had not planned to make this place permanent. She had planned to be temporary, and then she had enrolled 4 children in a preschool and joined a parents' committee she did not have time for. And the temporary had arranged itself into something that was simply her life. She had a degree in economics from Georgetown and a master's in corporate strategy completed in the final year of her marriage quietly, in the evenings, with the private conviction that she was preparing for something she could not yet name. She worked for a small consulting firm where her thinking was precise and trusted. She was 34 years old and she had 4 children. And that combination had produced a version of herself that was substantially more capable than the one who had arrived in New York at 25, believing she understood most things. The morning Elena's silence finally cost her something began, as all her mornings began, with noise. Specifically, Maeve arguing with Owen about a red crayon. From the kitchen, where Elena was making 4 separate variations of scrambled eggs because her children had 4 separate and emphatic opinions about what a person's eggs should look like. She listened and tracked the escalation by volume. Low volume meant negotiation. Medium volume meant an appeal to absent authority. The specific silence that followed medium volume meant either resolution or a tactical retreat before the second round. Clara, even at 4. Clara's voice had a particular quality, the quality of a child who has learned that clear communication produces better results than noise, and who applied this with the focused efficiency she brought to most things. Maeve hit Owen with the crayon. Did not, Maeve said. She did, Noah added. From somewhere in the playroom, without any evidence he had witnessed this event. Noah had the habit of rendering verdicts on situations he had not observed. Elena had been addressing this since he was 2. He was 4 years old and had the disposition of someone who has never been uncertain about his conclusions. Elena turned off the burner and stood in the doorway. 4 children looked at her with the alert attention of people who understand they are, in some capacity, implicated. The crayon can wait until after breakfast. Wash your hands, all of you. 4 years of exactly that. 4 years of negotiations, verdicts, breakfasts, and the daily work of raising 4 distinct people who each had a serious sense of themselves and a complete willingness to express it. She had not anticipated loving it in quite the way she did. She had been 29 when they arrived, alone in a Boston hospital with a labor nurse named Patricia, who had been doing this for 30 years, and who told Elena afterward, with genuine admiration, that quadruplets were still the thing that surprised her every time. Elena had held all 4 of them in a room quiet with the specific quiet of the hours after something irreversible has occurred, and she had understood bypassing her usual instinct to think before feeling that her life had reorganized itself around these 4 people, and that she was exactly where she needed to be. Her mother had come from Philadelphia without being asked. She had arrived on the 3rd day with a bag that suggested she had not packed for a brief visit, and she had not said a single word about Damien Cole in the hours they spent together that week, or in the months that followed. Susan Voss had expressed her opinion about Damien Cole on exactly one occasion in a hospital parking garage and then set it aside and became, practically and without drama, the force that kept the household running while Elena learned to do something she had not known she would have to do alone. Elena had returned to work at 14 months. She was good at it, in the way she had always been good at this kind of thinking, the kind that requires holding a complex system in the mind and finding which thread. when pulled, changes the shape of everything else. 4 years of managing 4 children and one opinionated grandmother had not diminished that capacity. It had sharpened it into something she had not previously had occasion to name. The children finished their breakfasts. Noah ate without argument, which was unusual and which Elena noted without remarking on, because remarking on it would prompt a detailed explanation of his reasoning. And the school bus came at 8:10. Clara worked through hers with systematic focus. Maeve and Owen reached some private arrangement about the crayon involving a schedule. Elena was not made privy to. The two of them had developed an interior negotiation system over 4 years that was, she sometimes thought, the most efficient conflict resolution mechanism she had ever observed. She dropped them at school at 8:15. 4 backpacks, 4 goodbye kisses, Maeve insisting on going in first. Noah locating his library book in the bottom of his bag after 45 focused seconds. Clara straightening her own collar in the car window's reflection. Owen narrating a dream involving a train and a very large dog. She watched them disappear through the gate and stood there for an extra moment in the October morning, which was what she did on most days without examining why. And then she drove home. The letter arrived at 9:47. She knew before she opened it. The weight of the envelope, the document paper folded inside. The return address, Whitfield, Crane and Associates. A Manhattan address. A 212 area code she recognized without wanting to. She sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the school day house and opened it. This office represents the interests of the Cole Family Trust in matters pertaining to its administration and distribution. We are writing to inform you of a pending amendment to the trust instrument, which will take formal effect 30 days from the date of this notice. Under the terms of the amended instrument, beneficiary designations will be finalized according to formal documentation of biological descent from Damien Hargrove Cole. Any individual for whom a claim of biological descent has not been formally registered with the trust administrator and verified by qualified documentation prior to the amendment's effective date will not be recognized as a beneficiary under the trust's revised terms. If you believe you may have a claim to register, we ask that you respond to this office no later than 30 days from the date above. Claims received after this date cannot be considered under the amended instrument. She read it once, then again, then a third time, with the part of her that had spent years learning to find the load-bearing fact underneath the language that careful legal drafting uses when it is trying to accomplish one thing while appearing to accomplish something else entirely. Whitfield, Crane were good. The language was precise and, on a surface reading, almost purely procedural. A trust being restructured. Beneficiary designations formalized. A window provided for documentation. The kind of letter that most recipients would file under estate matters and address after finishing their coffee. She was not most recipients. 30 days. Any claim not registered in 30 days would be permanently excluded from a trust that had been in the Cole family for 4 generations, whose assets were, by the estimates she had reluctantly followed in the financial press, large enough that the word substantial was doing significant understatement. Her 4 children born in a Boston hospital, registered under her name, with no formal connection to anything named Cole in any system that Vivian Cole's legal team could have accessed, would be written out before anyone with the standing to include them had been told the window was closing. She set the letter on the table. She had thought about Vivian Cole a specific number of times in 4 years and had been deliberate about not thinking about her more than necessary. Examining certain things too often does not reduce their weight. It redistributes it. She had gotten efficient at placing certain thoughts in a specific interior location and not opening it unnecessarily. But she thought about Vivienne Cole now, and thought about her clearly. A trust amendment of this complexity took 6 months at minimum. Someone had begun this before Elena had given them any identifiable reason to think it was necessary. Someone had begun it out of precaution, or instinct, or the vigilance of a person who has been maintaining a fiction for 4 years and understands, in the part of herself that does not get to rest, that the maintenance of a fiction is never entirely under one's own control. She went to the bedroom. The second drawer of her bedside table had a slight resistance when it had not been opened in some time. She was aware of this, the way she was aware of most specific things about her apartment, which was thoroughly. She opened it now and looked at what was inside. An unsealed envelope with her own name, written in her own handwriting. The slightly compressed version she used when writing for herself rather than for an audience. She had put it there the night she moved into this apartment, when the children were 7 months old and she had unpacked the last box, the one she had been carrying since the hospital, and had not opened during the months in between because she had not been ready to look at what was inside it. She had opened the drawer twice since then, once to look at the envelope, once to take it out and put it back. These were not acts of avoidance. They were the management of something not yet needed. Preserved in the place she would know to find it. Inside, one page. A medical record from Dr. Andrea Moss, Boston Women's Health Associates. A standard fertility assessment, completed in the ordinary course of prenatal evaluation, the week Elena confirmed the pregnancy. The document described, in the measured language of reproductive medicine, a woman in excellent health with no indicators of fertility compromise. She had requested it the same afternoon she had been shown a different document. She had been sitting in a conference room she had not been told the purpose of, across a table from a Cole family attorney named Wentworth, who had the professional composure of a man accustomed to delivering difficult news in comfortable offices. Beside Wentworth, a report, a medical evaluation from a clinic she did not recognize, bearing a physician's name she had never heard. The report described a woman with a congenital condition affecting reproductive capacity, 0% probability of natural conception, an unfortunate circumstance that had gone undiagnosed until this evaluation. She had been 8 weeks pregnant. She had been sitting across from the man she had loved for 4 years, watching him hold a document that described her body as something it was not. And she had known with the absolute certainty of a woman who has had her own test results explained to her by her own doctor, in her own words, that the document was false. She had also known, in the same moment, that he believed it completely. That was what she had never been able to put down. In 4 years of deliberate not examining, not the forgery, not even the existence of a person willing to arrange it. What she could not put down was the completeness of his belief. He had been given a piece of paper describing her body and had not asked her, had not said, "Is this what you know to be true?" He had accepted the document and brought her the conclusion as a settled fact, and she had sat in that room and understood that this was the clearest version she had yet seen of something he had always done in smaller ways, taken the account of her that was most convenient and not checked it against the person actually in front of him. She had signed the divorce papers that afternoon. Her attorney, Patricia Cheng, had laid out the case for contesting, firmly. Across a table in a different conference room, Elena had listened. She had said, with the calm of someone who has already decided, that she was not going to fight for a man who had not thought she was worth asking. Patricia had disagreed. Elena had respected the disagreement. She had signed anyway. She stood now in her bedroom, holding the envelope, and thought about that version of herself. 28 years old, 8 weeks pregnant, too proud to produce the evidence that would have ended the conversation in 5 minutes, because producing it felt like submitting herself to the judgment of someone who had already demonstrated he would judge without consulting her. She had been wrong not about the pride, but about the cost. Patricia had told her the cost extended beyond herself, and Patricia had been right. And Elena had made the choice before she understood how far beyond herself it would reach. It had reached 4 children. She put the envelope in her bag. She called Patricia at 9 minutes past 10. "I need to see you today. This afternoon, if possible. I have received correspondence from the Cole family's legal representation. The pause Patricia made was the rapid calculation pause Elena knew well. 11:30. My office. I will be there. She stood for a moment after the call in the October light and thought about New York. The streets she had known well enough that they had stopped being specific and had become the texture of a life she had been living, and then had stopped being even that. The building where Damien Cole offices occupied 2 floors of a tower on Park Avenue, where she had sat in many conference rooms and had, more than once, the specific experience of being the most precise thinker in the room while being the person least expected to speak. She thought about her children. Who would come through the school gate at 3 with backpacks and opinions and needs she had been meeting for 4 years, and which she would not stop meeting because Vivienne Cole had decided that a legal mechanism was cleaner than honesty. Her mother would need to know. Her mother would have a response that was simultaneously accurate and difficult to receive in the moment of receiving it. And then she would reorganize herself, as she always did, around what was practically needed. Elena was going to take the 4-hour train. She would go to Patricia's office first, understand the full shape of what she was walking into, and then decide what came next. She had learned, in 4 years of doing things she had not been prepared to do, that clarity about the terrain is the necessary condition for moving through it, without losing ground she could not afford to lose. She was going to New York. She was going to enter a legal process that would end with 4 children recognized publicly as Cole heirs, or not recognized at all. She was going to stand in rooms she had left 4 years ago without looking back. And she was going to look back. And she was going to do it with one envelope in her bag containing the single document that made everything else possible. She went to tell her mother. She moved through the apartment, and the rope swing moved in the October yard through the kitchen window, and the photographs of 4 children on the refrigerator caught the low morning light, and everything was in its place. For a few minutes more, the morning was simply the morning. Then she picked up her bag and went to the car, and the next 30 days began. Chapter 2. She walked back into his world. The train south from Boston to New York took 4 hours and 14 minutes, and Elena had not slept. She had bought a window seat in the quiet car for this reason, and she had used none of the time to do the things people use long journeys to do. She had sat with her coffee and her window, and had let the landscape go past without organizing it, because she had found, over 4 years of managing situations that required clarity, that clarity does not always come from thinking harder. Sometimes it arrives in the gap between focused thought and whatever the mind does when it is not working. By the time the city began to thicken outside the window, the industrial landscape giving way to the stacked density of Upper Manhattan, the Hudson catching the mid-October light, she had something close to it, not a plan in detail. The understanding of what she was walking into, which was both more difficult and simpler than it had seemed at 5 that morning. She had called the children the previous evening, when they were in bed, and each one had the particular voice of a person trying to sound less tired than they were. Owen had told her about something that happened at lunch involving a ball. Clara had wanted to know when she was coming back, and asked with the directness she brought to most things, the directness of a child who prefers accurate information over comfortable imprecision. Maeve had said, "I know," before Elena finished her second sentence. Noah had been mostly quiet, but had stayed on the line longest, holding the phone in the way that was his version of saying something without saying it. She was carrying 4 photographs in the front pocket of her briefcase, one of each of them, taken 3 weeks ago in the yard. She had put them there deliberately, not as sentiment but as reminder. In certain rooms, it would be useful to have them close. The train arrived at Penn Station at 12:40. She did not allow herself to feel anything particular about being in New York. She noted the feeling that tried to arrive something between familiarity and the specific resistance that comes from familiarity combined with absence, and she set it aside. It was a practice she had developed early in the marriage, and had kept after it ended. Diana Solis met her at the door of the conference room on the 21st floor of Feldman, Crane and Walsh on Lexington Avenue. They shook hands with the efficiency of two women who have already established the terms of a professional relationship and do not need the social scaffolding around it. Diana was 47, compact, with the particular stillness of a litigator who has learned to conserve energy for moments that require it. Patricia had said, "She is the right person for this room." The trust amendment was filed 6 months ago, Diana said, before Elena had fully settled into her chair. Elena looked at her. "The communication to you is dated this month, but the amendment instrument itself, the actual document restructuring the trust pet's beneficiary provisions, was filed with the Cole family's trust administrator in April." Diana turned her laptop so Elena could read the filing date. April 9th, 4 months before you made any identifiable move toward New York. Elena sat with this. The understanding arrived fully formed. The way things do when you have been prepared for them by months of paying a particular kind of attention. "She began this before she had any reason to know I was coming," Elena said. "Before she had any visible reason." Yes, Diana folded her hands. "The amendment is too specifically structured for coincidence." The beneficiary language was rewritten around one scenario: biological children of Damien Cole, born outside the current marriage and not registered as heirs before the amendment date. That is not standard trust maintenance. That is purpose-built architecture. A pause. "She has been preparing for your return for some time." The question is whether she prepared for it because she feared it, or because she knew something specific. She knows about the pregnancy. Diana's expression did not change. "Tell me how," Elena explained. The timeline. 8 weeks pregnant when the divorce papers were served. The forged fertility report, bearing a clinic name she had not recognized and a physician she had never heard of. Her decision to sign without contest. The medical record from Dr. Moss she had taken with her and kept for 4 years. In a drawer. In an unsealed envelope with her own name on it. Diana listened without interrupting, mapping what she heard against what she already knew rather than assembling a response. When Elena finished, the silence lasted 11 seconds. "If Vivian arranged the forgery, she knew you were capable of conceiving at the time of the divorce," Diana said. "She may not have known about the pregnancy specifically. She may have simply known the report was false and understood the risk that implied. Or she did know. The timing of the amendment suggests sustained concern, not a recent alarm." She pulled a document from the folder in front of her. "The legal position is this. Your 4 children are biological heirs of Damien Cole, born in lawful marriage. Their claim to Cole Trust status is valid under the original instrument prior to the amendment. To contest the amendment, we file an emergency motion asserting it was designed specifically to exclude known or discoverable heirs. Paired with the forged medical report, you have the foundation for a civil fraud claim against Vivian Cole personally to file," Elena said. "I have to declare the children publicly. The moment the motion enters the record, yes, their existence becomes part of a public legal proceeding." Diana looked at her directly. The quiet phase ends. Elena had known this before she came. She had known it on the train, and she had known it in the Boston kitchen, holding the letter. Knowing it in advance did not make it simple. 4 years of privacy. 4 years of a life where her children were simply themselves, 4 specific people in a specific city, belonging to no dynasty, carrying no weight that was not their own. That life was ending. She had not been given a choice about whether it would. Only about the terms. "I understand," Elena said. 3 days of groundwork first. Diana said, "I want you visible in New York before we file. Not in any context that connects to the Cole situation: professional, social, ordinary. A woman who returned to the city for professional reasons and who, in the course of that return, found herself compelled to act on a legal matter. The sequence matters for perception." Elena considered it. "What specifically do you need?" "The MoMA benefit on Thursday evening. One of Halcyon's partners sits on the foundation board. Your attendance is professionally explicable and socially unremarkable. Diana's voice remained level. Damien Cole's name is on the donor list. I understand, Elena said. And this time, the two words carried a different weight than they had the first time. She had not thought, going in, that the sight of him would be the difficult part. She had thought, in the way that you think in advance about things you have never actually experienced, but believe you have adequately mapped, that the difficult parts would be the legal conversation, and the decision to file, and the decision to file, and the moment of telling her children what was happening. These were all difficult in the ways she had anticipated. The Thursday evening gala was in the museum atrium, lit in a way that made the space feel like something was being celebrated, even when nothing in particular was. 200 people in formal dress in the specific configurations of a high society function. Clusters of people who know each other too well to pretend otherwise. Clusters of people who don't know each other well enough to stand alone, and the individuals moving between them with the easy efficiency of people who know exactly which cluster to approach and why. Elena had attended many of these. She wore a dark navy dress, a hair up, and she carried herself in the way she had learned to carry herself in rooms like this, with a quality of self-possession that communicated she had not come here to want anything from anyone, which was both performed and true. She was at the drinks table, speaking with one of Halcyon's senior partners about a client engagement that had nothing to do with anything important, when she felt it. Not a sound, not a movement in her peripheral vision. The specific, irrational, completely certain awareness of being in the same physical space as someone who has occupied a particular part of your memory for 4 years without permission. She had read descriptions of this phenomenon and had found them overwrought. She revised her opinion in the 2 seconds before she turned her head. She turned by approximately 20 degrees and found him across the room, without searching, as if her attention had known exactly where to direct itself. He was in conversation with 2 other men, his body at an angle that suggested he had not yet seen her, or was managing the appearance of not having seen her, which with Damien she had always had to distinguish between, because they were different things and required different responses. He had the posture he had always had in rooms like this, upright, apparently relaxed, taking the measure of everything around him with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who believes he can read any room he enters. He was 41 now. He looked it, but well, the way of certain men in whom the years produce solidity rather than diminishment. She looked at him for 3 seconds, which was the honest amount of time the looking required. And then she returned her attention to the halcyon partner and the engagement that had nothing to do with anything important. He had seen her, of course. Damien Cole had seen Elena Voss 17 seconds before she turned her head, and he had spent those 17 seconds doing what he had trained himself to do when a situation produced something unexpected, taking the measure of the thing before responding to it. He had had no idea she was in New York. He had not known she was in this room. He had been standing with 2 board directors discussing a capital deployment question he could answer in his sleep, when the particular way a woman moved through a crowded room caught the very edge of his vision. And he had looked. And then something in him that was not thought had said, "That is Elena." She looked more fully herself. That was the only way he could assemble it in the seconds before she turned, and the seconds after. When her gaze moved past his direction without landing on his face, she was not going to acknowledge him tonight, which was entirely her right, which also told him something he filed automatically, that she was in this room with full knowledge of him, that her position had been chosen deliberately, that Elena, who had always been the most precise person in any room she occupied, was here for a reason, and the reason connected to something in the world he was still living in. The board directors were still talking. He returned his attention to them with the ease of a man who has spent 2 decades becoming good at appearing to be present in conversations his mind has partially left. He told Vivienne at 9:15 The decision to say nothing had lasted 3 minutes before failing, because Vivienne had sources in these rooms, and she would find out regardless. And the discovery that he had withheld it would create a problem larger than the disclosure. Vivienne made a face that was not visible as a face, just a brief recalibration behind her eyes. Then, how strange, in the tone of something being noted and filed. And then she moved on, in the way that communicated the subject was now being managed by her, and he did not need to continue holding it. He watched her over the following hour at a careful distance. He had been watching Vivienne more carefully over the past 6 months than in the first year of their marriage, because the difference between the surface of her and what was happening underneath it had been becoming less easy to dismiss. He did not yet know what to do with this observation. He was not sure he was ready to look at what it indicated. What he saw at 11:40 was this. Vivienne in conversations with two people he did not recognize, one of them with the slightly too attentive posture of someone who does not want to miss something, which he recognized as press, and Vivienne in her quiet register voice, the one she used when she was placing something rather than saying something, not performing loudly, offering carefully, the specific mode of a person seeding a narrative. He was not close enough to hear the words. She was not meant to. She was moving through the atrium at the unhurried pace of someone with no reason to hurry when she passed the other side of a tall, white flower arrangement topping a room divider. And she stopped with the involuntary arrest of someone who has registered something before identifying what it is. Through the flowers, at no great distance, Vivienne Cole's voice. The fertility situation was known before the marriage ended. These things are genuinely devastating for women who have always had a clear sense of their own capability. When a woman like Elena is confronted with a medical reality that contradicts her self-image, the emotional fallout can be very significant. I have always felt for her. Whatever happened afterward, Elena stood very still. The words themselves were not extraordinary. They were the language of performed sympathy, which Vivienne handled with real technical skill, the kind of statement that reads as generous, while placing a specific idea in a specific listener's mind. But the detail, the fertility situation was known before the marriage ended. That was not information Vivienne should have had access to. The divorce had been clean and swift, with no discovery process, no shared medical documentation, no deposition in which either party's health history had been produced. The fertility report had been presented as having been commissioned by the Cole family's medical team, which meant its contents should have been known only to that team, the physician whose name appeared on the document, and to Damien. Vivienne had just described Elena's medical history with the specific, unguarded fluency of someone who had authored it. Elena moved away from the flowers and continued across the room at the same pace she had maintained for 2 hours. Because nothing useful is accomplished in a room when you let your composure change. And because she needed the cold October air of the 3 blocks between the museum and the hotel to do the work of understanding exactly what she had just been given. She was on the sidewalk before she allowed herself to take the breath she had been managing. She called Diana at 11:53. "I heard something tonight," she said. "Are you awake? Tell me," Diana said. Elena told her, word for word. 4 years of doing things that required accuracy had made her very good at holding exact language when it mattered. Diana was quiet for a long moment afterward. "That is not a casual error," Diana said. "That is not someone repeating something she heard from Damien, known before the marriage ended. If you had genuinely been diagnosed with a fertility condition during the marriage, that language would be natural. The condition would have been discovered, known, and then disclosed. But the report was the cause of the divorce, not its context. To call it known rather than discovered is the phrasing of someone who was aware of it before its existence was ever disclosed to you." The pause was brief and contained the sound of rapid calculation. "She just handed us something very useful. How soon can we file?" Elena said. 72 hours. I want this clean. Elena stood on the sidewalk with the city moving around her in the indifferent, simultaneous way of a million lives occupying the same space. And she felt something settle in her, not triumph, not relief. The specific clarity of a woman who has been in the uncertain phase of a necessary thing and has just understood that the uncertain phase is over. She put her phone in her bag and walked to the hotel. She had come back to this city without a plan to stay. She had come back because 4 children were going to be written out of something that belonged to them before they were old enough to fight for it themselves, and because she was the only person standing between them and that outcome. She had come back carrying a single piece of paper kept for 4 years in a bedside drawer, and she had waited to need it, and now she needed it. And now she had something more. In 72 hours, the quiet phase would end. Her children's names would be spoken in rooms she could not control, by people she did not know, for purpose she had not chosen. She had not been given a choice about whether this happened, only about who controlled the moment it did. She was going to control the moment. She went inside and sat at the hotel desk and wrote down the words Vivienne Cole had said, in order, while they were still exact. Because tomorrow there was work to do, and the work required everything to be precisely as it was. She wrote until the words were on the page and safely outside her. Then she turned off the lamp and let the city go on without her, and slept. Chapter 3. One photo changes everything. The notepad on the hotel desk had Vivienne's words on it in Elena's handwriting. 11 lines, written at midnight with the focused precision of someone who understands that exact language does not stay exact after sleep. Elena read them again over her first coffee of the morning. The words had not changed. They were still words of a woman who had described a medical history she should not have known, as if she had always known it, in a room full of people who would remember hearing them, to a journalist who would, when the time came, be asked what he had been told. She called Diana at 7:15. The Digital Forensic Review is back, Diana said. Before Elena had finished her first sentence, she had clearly been awake longer. We found the document trail on the forged report. The imaging software used to produce it was registered to a medical document service company called MedPrint Solutions. They work primarily with private clinics and specialist practices. The specific license associated with your document was accessed from an IP address that traces to a production company Vivienne Ashworth now Cole operated before her marriage. She wound it down 2 years into the Cole marriage. But the historical IP records are still accessible. A pause. The same IP address accessed files from a consulting LLC Vivienne was listed as the director of in the 18 months before the wedding. The forensic trail is not a confession, but it is a link. Combined with the verbal slip, it is enough for a civil fraud claim and enough for a criminal complaint to be considered seriously by a district attorney. Is it enough to block the asset transfer? No, Diana said. For that, we need the motion filed and the claim formally before a judge. The transfer is proceeding. I received notice this morning that the Cole family office is restructuring assets into a holding company, a Delaware LLC, with a nominated trustee that has no public connection to Vivienne's name. If that transfer completes before our motion is heard, your children's claim becomes real in legal principle and complicated in practical execution. Years of work rather than months. How long until the transfer completes? 72 hours. Possibly 60. Elena set down her coffee. Then we file tomorrow morning, she said. Not in 72 hours. Tomorrow. I'll be ready, Diana said. I need you to do one thing today that is not the filing. Margaret Cole, Elena said. A brief pause on the line that communicated something Diana would not say directly, which was that this was the part she could not control for, and that she had been thinking about it. She deserves to know before the filing makes it public, and she may be useful not as a legal resource, but as a human one. Damien is going to need someone in his life who is not a lawyer when this lands. Elena had known this since she made the decision to come to New York. She had simply been saving it. The way you save the hardest thing until you have built enough of the structure around it to hold the weight. I'll call her this morning, Elena said. Margaret Cole's apartment was on the 14th floor of a building on East 72nd Street that had been in the Cole family since 1974, and that communicated the specific quality of old money, which is not luxury so much as permanence. The kind of apartment where the furniture has been in the same position for 20 years, not because the occupant lacks imagination, but because the furniture is exactly where it should be, and the question of rearranging it has not arisen. Margaret Cole was 68 and had the quality of a woman who has spent most of her adult life in a world that required performance and who has, somewhere in the past decade, stopped performing things she does not mean. She was small, precise, silver-haired, and she had opened the door herself, the first signal that she understood this was not a social visit. Elena, she said, and the word had a quality Elena had not prepared for, not warmth exactly, but recognition of a specific kind. The recognition that comes when something you thought you would not see again is standing in front of you, and you are taking a moment to simply register it. Thank you for seeing me, Elena said. The sitting room faced the park, and the October trees were at that stage of turning where they were maximally themselves, red and gold against the flat sky. They sat across from each other at a low table where Margaret had set tea she had made herself, which Elena accepted and did not immediately drink. I have something to tell you, Elena said, and something to show you. And I have to ask you to hold what I give you for one more day before you do anything with it. I need you to know why I am asking that before I ask it. Tell me, Margaret said. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her expression was the expression of someone who has prepared herself, on the walk from the kitchen to the sitting room, to receive something large. Elena explained the legal situation first. The trust amendment filed in April, the 30-day window, the motion they were filing in the morning. She explained it the way she had explained it to Diana and to Patricia, with the precision of someone who has told a thing often enough to have found its clearest shape. Margaret listened without interrupting, the way of a woman who understands that the questions she has will be answered if she waits. When Elena had finished laying the legal foundation, she took the photograph from the front pocket of her briefcase. It was the one from the yard, taken 3 weeks ago, all 4 of them. In the unposed seconds before Maeve had noticed the camera and said something that made Owen look over, and Clara had turned with the focused expression she wore when she was assessing a new situation, and Noah was already looking directly at the lens in the way he did everything. Without hesitation, she placed it on the low table between them. Margaret Cole looked at the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. Elena said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say in the silence of a woman encountering something that was rearranging itself inside her. Margaret's hand moved toward the photograph. She stopped herself. She looked at Elena. "How long have you known?" she asked. Her voice was very quiet. "Since before I signed the papers," Elena said. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a fact landing in the place in a person where facts that change everything land. Margaret looked back at the photograph. Her hand moved again, and this time she let it complete the movement. She held the photograph in both hands, carefully. The way you hold something you understand is significant. Maeve, Owen, Clara, and Noah, Elena said. They are 4 years old. Maeve and Owen argue about crayons. Clara is systematic and expects to be heard. Noah renders verdicts on situations he hasn't personally witnessed. She paused. They have your son's jaw, 2 of them. Particularly, Margaret was quiet for a moment more. Then, the fertility report was forged. I had my own assessment the same week. My results were normal. I was 8 weeks pregnant when Damien served me the papers. I said nothing. "Why?" Margaret said. And it was not quite a question. More the single word of a woman who is trying to locate the edge of a thing she is still mapping, because he believed it, Asana said. Without asking me, Margaret absorbed this. She set the photograph down on the table between them, carefully, as if it were something that needed to be placed precisely rather than set down. She looked at it for another moment. Then she looked at Elena with the expression of a woman who has just understood several things at once, and who is deciding which one to say first. I knew something was wrong with Vivienne from the beginning, Margaret said. Not this. I did not know this. But there was always something she was managing, something underneath the management. I told myself it was the natural anxiety of a woman marrying into a complicated family. She, paused. I told myself that because it was more comfortable than the alternative. I am not asking you to do anything except wait one more day, Elena said. The motion files in the morning. After that, nothing can be reversed or adjusted or quietly corrected. I need the filing to come first. I need Vivian not to know that you know. I understand, Margaret said. She looked at the photograph again. I would like a copy of this, Margaret said, and her voice had something in it that was not quite steady. I will send you one, Elena said. Tomorrow. Damien found the amendment at 4:30 in the afternoon. He had not been looking for it. He had been working through the quarterly filings in his office on the 43rd floor. A routine review he conducted with the thoroughness of a man who had learned, early in his career, that the files a person does not look at closely are the files that eventually require looking at very closely in a setting he would prefer to avoid. The Coal Trust Annual Administration Report was in the stack. He opened it and went through the summary provisions in the way he always did, efficiently, because the trust's terms were familiar and the summary rarely produced surprises. He turned to the amendment register at the back. He had not known about an amendment. He looked at the date, April 9th. He looked at the description. Revision to beneficiary designation provisions and documentation requirements for biological descent claims. He looked at the initiation line. Request submitted through Cole Family Office. Administrator contact, V.A. Cole. He set the document down. He sat with it for a moment. April 9th. He worked backwards. In April, he had been in the middle of the Hartwell acquisition, working 16-hour days, flying to London twice in the same month. Vivian had been managing the household and the social calendar, and everything that she referred to collectively as the family side, which was a phrase she had begun using early in the marriage to describe the world that was not the company, and which he had accepted as a reasonable division of labor, without examining what it actually contained. He had not been consulted about an amendment to the family trust. He was the primary beneficiary and the named executor. He had not been told. He called his personal attorney, a man named Gerald Marsh, who had been handling Cole family legal matters since Damien was in his 30s and who answered with the efficiency of someone expecting the call he expected. The trust amendment from April. Damien said. Who authorized it? A pause. It came through the family office with your wife's administrative signature. Standard channel for non-investment trust matters. I assumed you were aware. I was not aware. A longer pause. I see. What specifically does it change? Gerald explained it. Damien listened, and the explanation was long and specific. And by the end of it, he had a precise and complete understanding of what the amendment did and did not do. And he was very still in a way he did not allow himself to be in front of other people. When did you first receive notice of this? Damien said. March. The request was dated March 31st. Initiated by Gerald stopped. By whom? Damien said. The pause on the line had the quality of a man who has understood he is being asked to confirm something that will make a complicated situation considerably worse. By a law firm that represents a holding company connected to your wife's personal financial interests. Damien said nothing for a moment. Gerald, he said, send me everything. Today. He put the phone down and sat at the desk with the trust documents in front of him, and the city going on outside his window in the way it always did, indifferent to what was being understood inside it. He thought about Elena Voss at the MoMA Gala 2 nights ago, the specific quality of someone who has come to a place with a purpose and is managing when to deploy it. Her not acknowledging him had not been avoidance. It had been its own communication to anyone paying the right kind of attention. He was paying the right kind of attention now. He thought about the date on the amendment, April 9th. He thought about the fact that he had not been consulted. He thought about the law firm in Gerald's file, a holding company with Vivian's name attached to it, and he felt the shape of something assembling itself in his understanding that had the specific weight of a thing he would not be able to set back down. He did not call Vivian. 3 floors below, in a call Damien did not know was happening. Vivian was on the phone with the senior partner of the firm managing the asset transfer. "I need the holding structure complete by close of business Friday," she said. Her voice was the voice she used for things that required precise execution. Not urgent, not demanding, but specific in a way that communicated that specific was the only acceptable mode. Not end of week, Friday, close. That is tighter than the original schedule by approximately 20 hours, the partner said. There are documentation requirements. I understand that. Vivienne said again, with the particular patience of someone who has thought through the documentation requirements and has decided they are manageable. I am not asking you to skip steps. I am asking you to run the steps in parallel rather than sequentially. This firm has managed more complicated timelines than this one. A pause on the line that contained the sound of someone who has just been reminded of what they are being paid. I will have confirmation of the structure by Friday morning. Thank you, Vivienne said, and ended the call. She had known Elena was going to file something since the night of the gala. Elena's posture in that atrium had been the posture of a woman managing when to deploy something she had already decided to deploy. The 30-day notice had been designed for exactly this scenario. The amendment had been filed in April because Vivienne had understood, earlier than most people would have thought to, that Elena's silence was a contingent fact and not a permanent one. She had been thinking through the conditions under which it would end for 4 years. What she had not anticipated was the verbal slip. She did not know, yet, that she had made it. The journalist at the gala had been a contact. She trusted someone who had run favorable copy before and who understood the nature of their arrangement. She had said what she said with the specific carefulness she always brought to press conversations. Offer enough to seed the narrative. Hold enough to maintain deniability. She had not registered the specific language she had used. Known before the marriage ended, she did not know that Elena Voss had been on the other side of a flower arrangement. She did not know that the words were on a hotel notepad in Elena's handwriting. She did not know that in 14 hours. A motion would be filed in the Supreme Court of the state of New York that would make everything she had built in 6 months of careful legal architecture immediately subject to judicial review. She went to dinner and was, as she always was, exactly what the occasion required. Elena called her children at 8 o'clock. Her mother answered first. Elena told her, in 12 sentences, the shape of what was happening and what was going to happen in the morning. Her mother was quiet for a moment after, the specific quiet of a woman who has been waiting for this phone call for 4 years without knowing it was coming. And then she said, I will tell them together, not separately, together. Yes, Elena said, that's right. Do you want to do it? Her mother said, you can do it now, if you want. I can put them all on. She thought about it for a moment. They were 4 years old. The thing she needed to tell them was that their lives were going to become somewhat more complicated for reasons that were not their fault, and that the reason for the complication was a truth about who they were that she had been keeping safe for them until the moment they needed to know it. That she was doing this because she loved them, and because they deserved to have what was theirs. Tell them I called, Elena said. Tell them I am coming home as soon as I can. Tell them I am doing something important. That it is for them. I will tell them, her mother said. She heard them in the background. The particular sound of 4 children in a house in the evening, the specific acoustic texture of people who share a life, the overlapping evidence of it. She held the phone for a moment past the end of the call and listened to it. Then she hung up and sat at the hotel desk, with the city outside the window, doing what the city always did. And she thought about what the morning would look like. The motion filed. Her children's names entered into a public legal record for the first time. The quiet phase ending, completely and irreversibly, before the day was half over. She thought about Margaret Cole, holding the photograph in both hands, returning to it, taking it in by increments. The way you learn the shape of something you already love, but have just been given permission to see clearly. She thought about 4 children on a rope swing in a Boston yard who did not yet know the full shape of the lives they had been born into, and who were depending on her to build the ground under their feet before they needed to stand on it. She had one night left. Chapter 4 Children and a War. The motion was filed at 9:47 in the morning. Diana had the clerk confirmations on her screen by 9:51. She printed it without ceremony and slid it across the conference table to Elena, who picked it up and read it the way she read everything legal, completely, linearly, to the last period. The document was 7 pages. It was precise. It named Maeve, Owen, Clara, and Noah Voss as the biological children of Damien Hargrove Cole. It named Vivian Ashworth Cole as the architect of a trust amendment designed to fraudulently exclude known or discoverable heirs. It asked the court for an emergency injunction, halting the asset transfer pending judicial review of the amendment's validity. It was the cleanest version of the truth Elena had produced in 4 years. She set the confirmation down. How long until media picks it up? Court filings go public immediately. Legal reporters monitor the dockets. An hour, maybe 2 before it's visible. By midday, it will have a headline. Diana was already on her laptop. We have a statement ready. 1 paragraph. Nothing added. Nothing conceded. But Elena, she looked up. Before the headline runs. Damien Cole needs to hear this from you directly, not from a notification on his phone. Elena had known this since the night she decided to file. She had known it the way she knew most difficult things. Early, clearly, and without the comfort of uncertainty. I know, she said. She picked up her bag. I am going now. The Cole Capital offices occupied the 43rd and 44th floors of a tower on Park Avenue that communicated the specific message of certain kinds of institutional power. Not look at us. But we have always been here, and will continue to be here regardless. The lobby was marble and restraint. Elena had been in this building many times during the marriage, and had developed specific comfort of a person who belongs somewhere by association, rather than in their own right. She did not have that comfort now. She was here on her own terms, for the first time. She gave her name at reception on the 43rd floor. The assistant, a young man, with the careful efficiency of someone new to a job in which carefulness is everything, looked at her name, then at his screen, then back at her with the practiced neutrality of someone who has just encountered a piece of information he does not know what to do with. Mr. Cole is in a meeting until 11, he said. I will wait, Elena said. She sat in the reception area, in the chair nearest the window, with her briefcase on her knee, and the city below going about its mid-morning business. Within 4 minutes, the assistant had made a quiet phone call. She was not certain whom he had called. It did not particularly matter. She waited 23 minutes. She heard him before she saw him as a specific acoustic quality of a man who has been moving through a building with efficiencies and has just entered a room where the speed of movement changes. She looked up. Damien Cole was in the doorway from the corridor to the reception area. He was in a suit he had clearly been in since early morning. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who has been told something and is completing the process of making it real. He had been told about the filing. She could see it in his face, the specific quality of someone who has been handed information and has not yet finished deciding what it means, but who is already, in some part of himself, beginning to understand the weight of it. His assistant had not just been discreet. He had been informative. "I would like to speak with you privately," she said. "I do not need a great deal of your time." A pause that lasted 3 seconds. Then he turned and said, to the assistant, something she did not hear, and held the door open. She walked through it. His office was on the corner of the building, 2 walls of glass. The city on both sides, the kind of view intended to communicate position and which, she had always thought, communicated something else as well. The specific exposure of a man who has put himself at the top of something and can be seen from every angle. She set her briefcase on the corner of the desk. She did not sit. She took out 3 things and placed them, one at a time, in front of him. It was the one from the yard, taken 3 weeks ago. The 4 of them in the unposed moment before Maeve noticed the camera, and the composition shifted. Maeve and Owen at the rope swing. Clara standing slightly apart with the focused expression she wore when she was taking in a new situation. Noah looking directly at the lens, as he always did. Without hesitation, she set it face up on his desk and stepped back. He looked at it. He did not say anything for a long time. He looked at the photograph in the specific way of a person who is taking something in that cannot be taken in all at once, that requires multiple passes, multiple returns to the same image as the understanding deepens past the surface. His face had the quality she had noted at the gala, the quality that was always there underneath the surface when something real was happening, the thing that was less controlled than the rest of him, the thing she had once been one of the few people allowed to see. "How old?" he said. His voice came out wrong, not loud or broken, but off in some fundamental way. The way a voice is off when the mind producing it has encountered something that bypasses the system that usually manages it. 4, Elena said. "They were born in October of the year I left." He looked at the photograph again. She let him. Then she placed the second document on his desk. Her original medical record from Dr. Andrea Moss, dated 4 years and 9 months ago. She placed it beside the photograph, so both were visible simultaneously. Then the third, the forged fertility report, the one that had been placed before her in a conference room by a family attorney named Wentworth, on a morning she had walked into without knowing what she was walking into. She had obtained a copy through Diana's legal process. She placed it on the other side of the photograph, so the 2 medical documents framed it like a margin. He looked at all 3 things together on his desk. She watched him read. Damien Cole had always been a precise reader, the kind who started at the beginning and moved through a document completely, not skimming, not jumping to conclusions. He read her original report. He read the forged one. He read them both to the bottom of the last page. When he looked up, she was already watching him. "I believed it," he said. He said it the way you say something you have been turning over in the past 20 minutes and have just found the words for. Not as an accusation of himself, not as a defense, just as the fact of it, which was, he had been given a document and had believed it and had never, not once, thought to ask the person the document was about whether it was true. "Yes," Elena said. "You did. I should have asked you." "Yes," she said. "You should have." She did not say it with bitterness. She had moved past bitterness in the first year in Boston, when the children were very small and the work of keeping them alive and healthy consumed every available hour, and the space for bitterness was simply not available and had eventually atrophied. What remained was the truth, which was less consuming but more permanent. He looked back at the photograph. He looked at the children with the focused, careful attention of someone who is memorizing something. His hand moved toward the photograph and stopped, and then completed the movement. And he picked it up and held it. "Their names," he said. "Maeve, Owen, Clara, and Noah," he said the names quietly, in order. Not to her, to himself, or to the photograph. She looked away from his face for a moment, because what was in it was more private than she knew what to do with. "The forged report," he said. Still looking at the photograph. "Vivienne." "Yes. The forensic trail connects the document to a medical imaging service she had used before the wedding. The metadata traces back to an IP address connected to a consulting company she controlled. Elena paused. Combined with a verbal disclosure she made at the MoMA gala, specifics about the report that she should not have known the fraud claim is solid. He set the photograph down. He set it down carefully, in the specific place he had picked it up from, as if replacing it precisely mattered. The trust amendment, he said. April 9th, filed in April through your family office. Initiated by a firm connected to a holding company under her name. Diana has the documentation. Gerald told me last night. His voice had moved into the register he used when he was processing something by describing it aloud, which she remembered from the marriage, as the register he used in meetings when he was working through a problem in real time. Except that in meetings, his voice had always had the quality of a man working toward a position he would control. This version of it had no position to reach. He was simply mapping something as it actually was, without a destination. She designed the amendment to ensure the filing window closed before any claim could be made. If the transfer completes before your injunction is heard, your children's claim is legally recognized but practically trapped behind 2 layers of corporate structure. Years of proceedings rather than months. He looked at her. That is what you filed the motion to stop. Yes, Elena said. That is what I filed this morning. She answered it immediately, because the number was Diana's, and Diana had been told not to call unless it could not wait. The transfer timeline moved again. Diana said, I received notification from the Cole family office within the last 30 minutes. The holding structure is being finalized, not by Friday, by tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. If we do not have the emergency injunction filed and a hearing scheduled before 5 o'clock today, the transfer completes overnight, and the injunction becomes a significantly different legal instrument. A pause. We have 4 hours and 40 minutes. Elena held the phone and looked at Damien across his desk. How solid is our position for the emergency hearing? She said to Diana. Strong on the fraud claim, strong on the forensic trail. But a judge granting an emergency injunction against a Cole family trust restructuring before we've had a full hearing is not automatic. We are asking a judge to halt a legitimate financial process on the basis of a claim filed this morning. Diana's voice was level and precise, which was her way of communicating that what she was saying was important and required to be heard clearly. If we have corroborating testimony about the forged document from someone inside the Cole family, if we have, specifically, the cooperation of the primary Cole beneficiary in confirming that the amendment was unauthorized and potentially fraudulent, that changes the weight of our application materially. A judge does not easily ignore the CEO of the trust's primary beneficiary company standing beside the injunction. The sentence landed in the office with the specific weight of something that was both a legal argument and a personal one. I understand, Elena said. I will call you back in 10 minutes. She ended the call. She looked at Damien Cole across a desk that had his name on the door, in an office with 2 walls of glass and a city on both sides, in the building that bore his family's name on the lobby directory, in the company his father had built over 50 years and which was, right now, being reorganized in the night by his wife to trap 4 children who had never asked to be born into any of this. She did not have a speech prepared. She had thought, when she planned this conversation, that she would explain the legal situation and let the logic of it do its work. And she had been right about that the logic was doing its work. But there was something underneath the logic that she had not prepared for, which was the specific experience of being in the same room as him for the first time in 4 years, with the full truth finally between them, and understanding that the next thing she said was going to be the most direct thing she had said to another person since she signed the divorce papers and left. I need you to tell me something, she said, not as a legal calculation, not as a strategic position. I need you to tell me. When you look at that photograph, what do you see? He looked at the photograph. He had not looked away from it for very long, since she placed it on his desk. I see, he said slowly. 4 people I have never met who are partly mine. A pause. And 4 years I am never going to get back. No, she said. You are not. He looked at her. But the next 20 years are still available, she said, if you decide they are. The office was very quiet in the way of high buildings above street level, where the city reaches you at a delay. Its sounds arriving softened and rearranged. She could hear his breath. She could hear the distant hum of the building's systems. She could hear the weight of the decision sitting in the room between them, which was not exactly silence, but was shaped like it. What do you need from me, specifically? He said. Your attorney, standing beside ours. When we file the injunction application this afternoon, a sworn statement confirming that the trust amendment was made without your knowledge or authorization. A statement that you recognize the children named in Elena Voss's motion as your biological heirs, and that you support the claim. She paused, right? And you will need to call Vivian's attorneys to tell them that you are not going to allow the transfer to complete, that you are opposing it as the primary beneficiary, and instructing the family office to cease all execution pending the court's determination. He was still for a moment. Then, what happens if I do not? The transfer completes tonight or tomorrow morning. The children's claim goes forward on its merits, but through a legal structure Vivian spent months building to make it as slow and complicated and expensive as possible. She looked at him directly. Your 4 children will eventually receive what is theirs. It will just cost them years and the kind of litigation that leaves marks. And if I do, we file the injunction by 4 this afternoon. The hearing is tomorrow morning. The judge decides whether to halt the transfer pending a full examination of the fraud claim. She paused. It is not certain. An emergency injunction is not automatically granted. We need the hearing. What we need from you is to make the hearing as strong as possible. He picked up the photograph one more time. He held it for a moment. He looked at Maeve at the rope swing, and Owen beside her, and Clara with her focused gaze, and Noah looking straight at the camera the way he looked at everything, without hesitation, with the complete willingness to see what was there. He set it down. He looked at Elena with an expression she had not seen on his face before, or had seen, perhaps, very briefly, in moments when the performance had slipped, and what was underneath it was visible for a second, before he reassembled himself. The expression of a man who is making a real decision rather than finding a position. The expression of a man who is deciding, in real time, who he is going to be on the other side of this moment. I am going to need 30 minutes, he said. I am going to call Gerald, and I am going to call the family office, and I am going to do something that is going to end my marriage today. He paused. Can you give me 30 minutes? There is a meeting room on 44. They will give you coffee. He looked at her, and the expression shifted into something less legible, not warmer, not softer, but more honest in a way that did not have a name. I have 30 questions I need to ask you about those 4 people, but none of them are for right now. No, she said. None of them are for right now. She picked up her briefcase. She walked to the door, and she stopped. And she looked back at the photograph, still on his desk between the 2 medical documents. And she thought about something Diana had said. A judge does not easily ignore the primary beneficiary standing beside the injunction. True. Correct. Also, she thought, not the only reason it mattered that he was going to stand there. She went to wait on the 44th floor, and Damien Cole called his attorney and his family office and his wife's legal team in that order, and the emergency injunction application was filed at 3:58 in the afternoon with 4 minutes to spare, and the hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock the following morning, and the asset transfer was halted by emergency order pending the hearing's outcome. Whether the order would hold was a question for tomorrow, tonight. On the 44th floor of a building with his name on it, Damien Cole sat with a photograph he had asked permission to keep and tried to learn the faces of 4 people he had not known existed until this morning, and thought about what it was going to mean to deserve them. He did not come to any conclusions. He sat with the photograph until the office was dark around him, and the city lit up outside the glass, and the overnight hours began. And then he went home to a marriage that was over and a morning that was going to require everything he had. Chapter 5. What was always theirs. Elena was awake before the alarm. She had slept 4 hours, which was enough. Which was what she had been sleeping on and off for 4 years when things required it. She lay in the hotel room in the specific dark of 5 in the morning and ran through the day the way she always ran through a day that mattered. Not the whole thing, not the outcome. Just the next true step, and then the one after that. The 9 o'clock hearing. Diana's prepared testimony. Damien's sworn statement from Gerald. Her own testimony, if the judge requested it. She called Boston at 5:40. Her mother answered before the second ring. They are still asleep, her mother said. All of them, which is unusual. I know, Elena said. Let them sleep. She had told them yesterday evening. The version of the truth, appropriate for 4 years old, that she was doing something important for them. That their names were going to be in a document that said who they were and who their family was. And that this was a good thing, even if it didn't feel simple. Noah had asked, "Is our family different from what we thought it was?" She had said, "Your family is exactly what it has always been. It is just bigger now than you knew." Noah had processed this and then said, "Okay," and gone back to what he had been doing, which was building something with stacking cups whose purpose he had not yet explained. She had thought about that okay for most of the 4 hours she had slept. Damien's message was in her phone when she looked. Gerald has filed everything. Documentation submitted to Diana's office at midnight. I will be at the courthouse at 8:30. She put the phone in her bag and went to get dressed. Vivian Cole's attorneys requested a settlement conference at 7:15. Settlement conference requests 2 hours before a scheduled hearing are not made by legal teams that believe they are winning. They are made by legal teams that have reviewed the morning's documents and performed a rapid recalculation. Do we go? Diana said. We go, Elena said. But we do not concede anything. We listen. They met in a conference room at Whitfield, Crane's offices on Fifth Avenue, at 8 o'clock. Vivian was already seated when Elena arrived with Diana on her left and Damien on her right. 3 attorneys flanked Vivian on her side of the table. Vivian herself was composed in the specific way of a woman who has been composing herself since before sunrise and is not going to stop now. She looked at Damien when he came in. She looked at him in the way you look at something you built your life on that has just crossed to the other side of a room. She did not look at Elena. Vivian's lead attorney opened with the procedural argument. The filing was made yesterday with no prior discovery. The forensic evidence was legally disputed. The amendment was authorized through proper channels. An emergency injunction was disproportionate. He said all of this with the smoothness of someone who knows where the pressure points are. Then Diana slid a folder to the center of the table and laid out the forensic chain, the imaging software, the IP address, the 3 registration records tracing back to a production company Vivienne had operated before the marriage. She laid out Marcus Delaney's sworn statement, confirming the verbal slip at the gala, word for word, with 2 witnesses named. She laid out Damien's sworn statement, confirming the amendment had been made without his knowledge or authorization. Preston turned to his client. The turn was brief and professional. What passed between them was not visible in words, but it was visible in the adjustment of posture afterward, the specific, contained deflation of a legal team that has just been shown the thing it was hoping not to be shown. Vivian looked across the table at Damien. It was a long look. The look of a woman completing the last measurement of a position she has been holding for 4 years and is now releasing. She had been brilliant. She had been, for 4 years, the most thoroughly prepared person in any room connected to this, and she had prepared for nearly every contingency. She had been wrong about what the building required, and the wrongness had compounded itself, as wrongness does, until it became this. Damien looked back at her. "Vivian," he said, and his voice had the quality of a man saying a name for the last time in a particular register. "Your attorneys are going to tell you to settle. Listen to them." Vivian looked at him for one more moment. Then she turned to Preston and said something very quietly that Elena did not hear. Preston nodded and asked for 15 minutes. The settlement was signed at 8:47. The asset transfer was canceled. The trust amendment was invalidated. Civil fraud charges were filed as a separate proceeding, outside the settlement's scope, and therefore still pending. The settlement could not make those charges disappear, and Preston had not tried. Elena signed. Diana signed. Damien signed with the particular stillness of a man holding several decisions at once without letting any of them show. Vivian signed last. She set the pen down with precision. She looked at the document for one moment. Then she stood, and her attorneys stood, and they left without speaking to anyone on the other side of the table. Diana exhaled slowly. The court still needs to formally approve the settlement and recognize the children's claim. But that is procedural now, not contested. End of week. Elena looked at the table where Vivienne had been sitting. She had expected to feel more than she did. Not triumph, she had never expected triumph. What she felt was the specific exhaustion of a thing held at tension for a long time and just released. She had come a long way to sign this document and ensure that people who were born not knowing any of this would receive what had always been theirs. That was the thing. It had always been theirs. They were outside on Fifth Avenue at 9:15. The morning was the cold, clear kind October occasionally produces the air with an actual edge to it. The sky very blue. Diana stepped to the side to take a call. Damien stood approximately 6 feet from Elena on the sidewalk and said, "Can I ask you something that is not about the settlement?" He did not ask immediately. He looked at the street for a moment, then at her, with the expression she had been cataloging since the night before, the expression that was less controlled than the rest of him, the one she had always been one of the few people allowed to see. "Tell me about them," he said, "not from the filing, not from the photograph. Tell me what they are actually like." She looked at him. She had been prepared for many things this morning: legal arguments, procedural challenges, the specific difficulty of watching Vivian's face while the case was laid out against her. She had not been prepared for this, not because it was unreasonable, but because it was so direct. And directness from Damien had always been the thing that surprised her most when it arrived. She thought about what to tell him. She had 4 years of material and approximately the length of a New York City sidewalk conversation. And she chose carefully, the way she chose most things. "Noah renders verdicts on situations he hasn't witnessed," she said. "He will tell you something happened with complete certainty before anyone confirms it. He is right about 60% of the time, which is, I have to say, a better average than most adults." She paused. "Clara has calculated the optimal arc of the rope swing for maximum efficiency. She shared the calculations with her siblings, who ignored them. She continues to refine the calculations regardless." Something moved across Damien's face that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same territory. "Owen named the rope Swing the Swinger," Elena continued, "which is not a sophisticated name. It has been the name for 11 months, and no one has questioned it." She looked at the street for a moment, then back at him. "Maeve goes highest. She has been going highest since the first time anyone put her on a swing. She does not do this to prove anything. She just goes as high as she can, because going high on a swing is the thing that she loves. And she is not the kind of person who does things she loves at less than full capacity." Damien was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where did Maeve come from?" "I have always liked the name. No family legacy in it." "No," Elena said. "No family legacy in any of the names." I was deliberate about that. He understood what that meant without her elaborating on it. She could see him understand it, the specific quality of a man receiving information about choices that were made in his absence, about his children, in a language that he is only now becoming fluent enough to read. "I missed 4 years," he said, not as an accusation, not as a request for anything, just the fact of it, placed between them. "Yes," she said, "you did. I am not going to get them back." He looked at the street for a moment. A cab went past. Two people across the street were arguing about something that had nothing to do with any of this, which was the thing about cities that was always simultaneously annoying and necessary. The next 20 years, he said, and looked at her. Are they available if I decide they are? She recognized the words. She had said them to him in his office the previous morning, and she had said them as a legal argument about the children, and he had heard them as something more specific. And now he was asking whether she had meant the more specific version or only the one that was a legal argument. She was honest with him, because she had driven 4 years to be in a position to be honest with him. And she was not going to stop now when the question was personal rather than legal. I do not know yet, she said. That is the true answer. The children are going to need to know you before I know what anything else looks like. That comes first. That is the only thing that comes first. I am not sure you do, she said. Not yet. You will, but not yet. She looked at him with the directness that had been her default mode since she was 28 years old, and had sat across a conference table and understood, in a moment of clarity that had cost her several years, what it meant when someone did not look clearly at the person in front of them. The thing you are going to have to do, Damien, the specific, ongoing daily thing is ask. Ask what they think. Ask them what they want. Ask them what they know. They are 4 years old, and they have opinions about everything, and they expect those opinions to be taken seriously. Because I have raised them in a house where they are. She paused. Do not assume you know the answer before you ask. He was very still. I know, he said. And his voice had the quality she had heard in his office when he said, I should have asked you the specific quality of someone who understands a thing precisely because they have seen, clearly, what it cost them not to understand it earlier. Diana came back. Confirmation from the court. The settlement is approved. The children's claim will be formally recognized by end of business Friday. A pause. It is done, Elena. Elena thought about a legal notice in a Boston kitchen 30 days ago, and an envelope in a second drawer, and a grandmother holding a photograph and not looking away from it. She thought about a night in a hospital when she had held 4 people at once and understood, past thought, that her life had reorganized itself around them, and that she was exactly where she needed to be. Yes, she said, it is. She took the afternoon train back to Boston. Damien had written his number on a plain card in his own handwriting, not his assistant's card with the office extension, and she had put it in the front pocket of her briefcase where the photographs were. She did not look at it on the train. She looked at the New England coast going past in October, the last possible version of itself before it became something else. She called her mother from the train. Tell them I am coming home, she said. She was home by 7. The lights in the apartment were on. She could hear them from the landing before she opened the door, the specific orchestral noise of 4 children in the evening hours, which was the noise she had been building her life around for 4 years, and which was, she thought, still the best thing she had ever found to build a life around. She opened the door. What happened next was the thing that happened every time she came home. The total transformation that 4 people underwent at the sight of her. Owen arrived in the hall first, because he was always first, and then Maeve pushing slightly ahead of him, and then Noah appearing at the kitchen doorway, with the careful watching quality he brought to everything, and Clara from behind him with her collar already straightened. She knelt down in the hall. All 4 of them arrived at once, which was the only way they ever arrived. Later, when they had been fed and bathed and put to bed with the negotiation and the protests and the final settling that bedtime in her household had always required, she stood at the kitchen window with her tea and looked at the yard. The rope swing was moving slightly in the October wind. The maple tree was as close to its last color as it was going to get before the cold took it. She took the card out of her briefcase. She set it on the kitchen counter and looked at it. A plain card, a personal number, a handwriting she had known for years and would have recognized anywhere. She thought about what the next 20 years looked like. She thought about 4 children who were going to grow into 4 people who would want to know where they came from and who would form opinions about everything they found there, as they formed opinions about everything. She thought about what it meant to build something slowly and honestly, after a long time of building nothing at all, and about whether the thing she was looking at on the playing card was an option or the beginning of something she had not yet named. She did not decide tonight. She left the card on the counter where she could see it, and she went to check on her children, each of them in turn. The way she always did in the last hour of the night, the specific survey of 4 sleeping people who trusted her completely, which was the weight she had been carrying for 4 years, and which was not. She had found a weight that diminishes you. It is the weight that tells you exactly what you are made of. Maeve was sprawled across 2/3 of her bed in the way she occupied everything maximally, without apology. Owen was curled small on his side, his hand near his face. Clara had her blanket straight, which she had done in her sleep, which was exactly the kind of thing Clara did. Noah was on his back with his eyes not quite closed still, even in the last moments before sleep, gathering data. Elena stood in the doorway of each room for a moment. Then she went back to the kitchen and turned off the light and left the card where it was. And the swing moved in the October yard, and everything was, for this moment, exactly as it should be. Here is what you need to know about how this story ended. It did not end in a law office, though that was where the legal fact of it was established. It did not end on a sidewalk on Fifth Avenue, though something important began there. It ended in a kitchen in Boston at 10 o'clock at night, with 4 children asleep in the next rooms and a card on the counter, and a woman at the window deciding what to do with the rest of her life. The civil fraud charges against Vivian Cole moved through the legal system with the methodical patience of formal proceedings, and produced, eventually, a settlement involving financial restitution and a binding agreement about her future role in the Cole family's affairs, which was to be no role at all. Damien called 3 days later. The conversation lasted 41 minutes. They did not resolve anything. They did not try to. What they did was begin. He came to Boston for the first time on a Saturday in November. He stood in the doorway of the apartment with the specific posture of someone who has prepared themselves and then understood, at the last moment, that no amount of preparation is equivalent to the thing itself. Elena stepped back to let him in. Noah looked at him from the hallway with the frank, assessing gaze of someone gathering data. Owen appeared at Noah's shoulder. Clara came from the kitchen doorway. Maeve was still on the rope swing in the yard, already going as high as she could go, which was the highest anyone in the family went. "You must be Damien," Noah said, with the authority of someone who has verified this independently. "Yes," Damien said, "I am." Noah considered this for a moment. Then, "We have a rope swing," he said. Owen named it the Swinger, which is not a good name, but we kept it. Damien looked at Elena for one brief, unguarded second. She looked back at him. "I would like to see it," he said, to Noah. "Okay," said Noah, and led the way. Elena watched them go. She stood in the hallway for a moment, in the quiet of a person who has done something very hard and has arrived, at some cost, at the other side of it, standing in the space between what was and what is still being built, understanding that this space is not empty, but full of the ordinary, irreplaceable material of a life that is still happening. Then she went to the yard.